Welcome to the Queen City Music Podcast, the podcast devoted to the local music scene in Charlotte, North Carolina. Now, here's your host, Matthew Ablan.
Hello and welcome to episode 78 of the Queen City Music Podcast. This episode of the QCMP is sponsored by Midwood Guitar Studio, Charlotte, North Carolina's own boutique guitar shop located in Plaza Midwood. Midwood Guitar Studio not only has the finest selection in boutique guitars, but familiar names like Fender, Martin, Taylor, Two Rock, and many others. Whether it's a guitar, bass, amp, effects pedal, or a much-needed accessory, the knowledgeable and friendly staff at Midwood Guitar Studio will help guide you in the right direction for your next purchase. And Midwood Guitar Studio also has a luthier on staff for all your repair needs. Visit their website at midwoodguitarstudio.com or stop in to see their unique shop at 1517 Central Avenue, Charlotte, North Carolina. By the way, if you have a business and would like to be a sponsor of the podcast, like our friends at Midwood Guitar Studio, drop me a line at qcmusicpodcast@gmail.com and I'll discuss all the information with you. Also, if you enjoy the podcast and would like to find out more about me, stop by MatthewAblan.com. There you'll find links to my events calendar, performance groups, the latest podcast episodes, and a host of other information. This month on episode 78 of the QCMP, I'm speaking with Nicholas Rhodes, otherwise known by his moniker, The Raven in the Road. If you're not familiar with Nicholas, like most musicians, he wears many hats: performer, guitar teacher, and podcaster. Nicholas Rhodes, welcome to the Queen City Music Podcast.
Hey, thank you.
Nicholas, so are you originally from the Charlotte area?
Actually, yeah, so one of the few.
Oh my gosh.
Born and raised.
I keep meeting more of you guys. I'm gonna have to use more than two hands, start counting on my toes. Jeez. All right, man, so what's your music background, Nicholas?
Yeah, so kind of going way back, I was a band nerd. So It all kind of started sixth grade. Yeah, started off on saxophone and just kind of kept up. Middle school, high school, college, doing the full ensembles and then big bands.
Okay. But I've checked out some of your videos, so you're doing guitar. Did you pick up guitar along the way, or? Yeah,
so it's always kind of a weird one. So I was born, pretty much came out the womb with a guitar in my hands.
Okay.
But one of four kids, and so we never really had that much money to go towards things like private lessons.
Right.
So it was a lot of kind of self-teaching and everything. Up through high school, and then what I was able to do was take a lot of the information I had from the school bands and some of that more music theory knowledge. I was able to transfer that over into teaching myself guitar.
Okay.
And then fast forward university, I was actually a bassoon major. Woo. And for the scholarship money, and I got it. It was great. But
that is a great scholarship.
Hated that instrument.
Is it a tough instrument to play?
It's weird, and there's a lot of especially with the double reeds. It's very fickle, and thoughts and feelings. Then it came time to switch, and it was between saxophone or guitar, and I love practicing guitar.
Yeah,
that is probably one of the only instruments I look forward to practicing and getting better on. And 2015 is when I made the switch. So that's kind of when I tell people I officially started playing guitar. 2015.
Now, when did you officially start singing? Because we'll go into how I met you, but I know you play guitar, you play in sax, and then you're singing too. So when did it all start to coalesce together? Yeah.
So the quick answer is January of this year. So January 24. Up until then, it's been years and years of lots of insecurity, to be honest.
Welcome to the club.
Right. And so with my guitar playing, I would approach my solos from a lyrical point of view.
Yeah.
So you get kind of more this John Mayer, Jimi Hendrix kind of feel. And then saxophone too, being a very vocal instrument, I would approach that as though I were singing. And so that was kind of my way to sing without singing. And then this year, the duo I was with kind of broke up, and so I was forced to really step out of that comfort zone. And it's been great just working on finding my voice, getting vocal lessons, the whole nine, and it's been a journey.
You do, man. You have a very unique voice. Listen to it. It's this kind of deep, I don't even know. I don't want to say it's almost gothic in a sense. That's what you were kind of remind me. I'm totally serious. Like your vibe is, I haven't had a chance to come see you live yet, but I mean, the videos that I've checked out, you kind of got this great kind of goth vibe. And I don't mean gothic music.
Right.
I mean, vocally.
No.
And I don't know how to describe it, but
No,
if you listen to yourself
it.
one time, think exactly what I said, and maybe you'll be like, now I know what he's saying.
Well, and that's what I think. One of my favorite ones is a buddy of mine, senior year, got me into Model UN, and so I'm up there and getting over my fear of talking over in front of all these people and everything. And everyone's like, your voice was so calming. And I was like, thank you. But that's been a hard thing, right? So all my life, I've never really been able to speak using my voice because it was too low. And so people couldn't, and it's lower and it's soft. So a lot of people couldn't understand what I was saying. And if I wasn't articulating clearly, it'd be very mumbled.
Yeah.
And so I would pinch and push my voice up. And that was the voice everyone heard, but it was never really my actual voice.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so this year is what I've really been working on, like tapping into that and trying to undo years and years of that forced pinch and push.
So does that mean you have to transpose all your tunes down for your lower voice?
Pretty much. Yeah. There are, that is the nice thing with vocal lessons. So we are kind of working on, shout out Mary Wyatt. We are working on kind of extending my range.
Yeah.
And so that's been super helpful. But yeah, I'm a bass 2 all day. So.
Man, you would be great for harmonies.
Right.
Here's that guy get Nicholas coming for harmony. Get the low part down there.
There you
go. That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That is awesome. So, and that Barry White. Now, I couldn't think of the name. I was going to
right.
think of Barry White, but Barry White's not gothic. Oh man. So, but I'm curious. So you got sax, guitar, vocals. Mm-hmm. But I was reading your bio, and you went to school and you studied jazz guitar?
Yes.
So
how does that fit?
Yeah. Where does that, when did you get into jazz? When did you get into jazz guitar? Okay. How long did you study with? Who'd you study with? Where'd you study with? Fill us in.
Oh, yeah. So the whole jazz thing actually started in 7th grade. And,
7th grade?
Yeah, that's when our...
jazz band at school?
Yep.
Okay.
And so it started with the big bands, and so I was doing Barry sax, and that continued all the way through high school, and then getting into college throughout. When I switched my major, so I went from classical on bassoon to guitar, and don't get me wrong, I love some classical guitar. I think it's
that's what I studied.
So beautiful. I've always wanted to get back into that, but ended up choosing jazz because at the time I had the red semi-hollow body Elliott to play. I just made that, and I was like, I can't have just made this wonderful, beautiful, immaculate guitar and then not use it.
Well, how come you didn't do jazz with sax?
Yeah, so it really came down to the wanting to practice. And saxophone, I've always had to force myself. Once I have it in my hands, I'm all for it. So I don't know if there's some like rebellious, middle school self that's still in the back of my head that kind of, I don't want to physically pick it up, but once I have it in my hands, I'll practice for hours.
Yeah.
But guitar was always one of those, like, I just always want to have guitar in my hands.
Yeah.
So that's the reason. Yeah,
Sweet.
I switched to guitar.
Okay, so fill me in about the jazz guitar. Where'd you go to school for it?
Yeah.
And did you study before you went to college playing jazz guitar?
No.
Okay.
So I was very green. So I went to the University of North Carolina at Pembroke.
Okay. My friend's daughter went there.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
It's a cool little school. It was definitely my OS school, my backup school.
Yeah.
I was had the acceptance. I was going to Johnson and Wales in Rhode Island, my island, for to go get a culinary degree and business degree. Always wanted to open up my own place, have live music, the whole nine. And my dad was like, "Have you ever thought about music?" And I was like, "Honestly, I thought that would have been off the table." So months beforehand, we're looking through all these schools. One thing led to another, and I was like, "Okay, I'll go here. I'll transfer out." But I fell in love with it. So Dr. Aaron Vandermeer was the head of the jazz department. Got to work with some great guys. I studied personally under Derek Day, who's just incredible guitarist.
Was there, so did you have an audition process?
Yes. Yep. So,
we're talking undergrad, right? Mm-hmm. So is it like a basic kind of like play scales? play a piece for me.
Yep.
Okay.
And since I was already there for over pretty much a year at that point, I already had the relationships established with the professors. So the music degree I got is what's called it's basically a music business degree. So it's kind of split. So it's not entirely performance-based like some that you'd get at UNCG.
Yeah.
But there was focus on like studio recording, which I had an interest in, entrepreneurship, which always interested me, and my whole family is very entrepreneurial. So it was just a whole mix of things. But got to work with him, and we would have these big jazz conferences every year. And so I've got to play with some great people. Jeff Coffin was kind of a big one, who's a lead horn player for Bela Fleck and the Flecktones.
Okay.
Also, who's a big Dave Matthews Band, right?
Yeah.
And traveling around New Orleans, going to some conferences and things like that. So
I'll ask you more about the jazz stuff, just because it's a track I didn't take. So when I was going to undergrad, I was studying privately with a guitar teacher, and I wanted to go to college. And I was talking to my teacher. His name was Rich Rabin. I'll give him a shout out. And Rich, I said, Rich, I want to go to school. I'm going to study music. Study guitar. What am I going to do? I mean, I know I can't play rock music. And he said, well, you have two choices. You can play jazz or classical. And I mean, jazz was okay. I mean, I was like 18 at the time, and I was like, it's okay. I don't really know that much about it. And I said, well, what is classical? I had no clue. And he's like, it's finger style. You got to play with your fingers. I said, I've always wanted to learn how to finger pick. That sounds pretty cool. And that's how I kind of started in classical. And I think I've told the story before, but when Andres Segovia died years before, I forget what year it was, 80-something, my grandfather at the time brought in the newspaper, and we were sitting at my table, and I played guitar at the time. My grandfather hands me the paper, and he points at Segovia because he was on the front page, I think, of the New York Post, and he had died. My grandfather was like, you know who that was? And I said, no. And he goes, it's the greatest guitar player who ever lived. And I'm like, really? So being a young guitar player, I had to go out and buy a couple of Segovia cassettes, and one of them I still have to this day.
Oh, no way.
It's like 40 years old or something like that. That's cassette. But the track for jazz guitar interests me. So you didn't have a track record for studying jazz guitar besides maybe jazz band, doing sax and stuff.
Yeah.
Did you go the way of Freddie Green and doing like four to the floor jazz? Were you trying to do solos? Were you doing, and when solo, I mean, solo lines,
right? Or
were you doing like solo jazz guitar, like bass chord, accompaniment kind of stuff? What did you get into?
Yeah, so a lot of that, the four, chuck, 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 chuck. That was a lot for the big band. But in the big band, I was doing Barry sax. So I wasn't doing guitar for that one. We did have a lot of jazz combos. And so it'd be about a 3-4 piece.
Yeah.
Drums, bass, guitar, some kind of horn. So for that kind of stuff, it was fairly, kind of like McCoy Tyner.
Yeah.
Kind of, playing, and then some solo lines in there. And then private lessons, we would work on jazz standards, solos. We do a lot of like chord melodies.
Gotcha.
Things like that. For that more solo guitar, how do you kind of do that?
Well, I was in grad school in Cleveland. I got to, I played classical, of course, in grad school, but I had met a friend of mine, James, and he ran a community group, jazz group called Gabriel's Horns, which is, shout out to them, just a great group of guys. And James kept bugging me to come play. And I'm like, James, I don't know anything about jazz. Just don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, man. You don't have to. And I'm like, come on. He's like, I'll hook you up. And I'm like, what are you going to hook me up with? He's like, I'm going to talk to our old guitar player, Maceo. Maceo, great guy. Maceo, he's since passed. Wonderful man. And I could play, but I didn't know what to play or how to play, because I have tried jazz lessons in the past, man, and it just never got into my head. There's lines, and but I figured, man, I could play chords. Chords are, anybody can play chords. Like, you can do your thing. And so I got into it, and then I got into, I played rhythm guitar in a big band as jazz group in Cleveland for a while. And then when I came to Charlotte, I kind of did the same thing for a little bit. Okay. So that was really fun, man. But I'm always envious of jazz players who can do lines, and I just, it's a vocabulary that I don't have.
Yes.
You know, did you, was it tough for you to start to develop that vocabulary if you came from a different kind of?
Not too much. I think just because my exposure so early on into that world of things, and personally, I've got a really weird taste in music, and so yeah, and I get bored easy, so that kind of leads you down a rabbit hole there. But I've always been drawn to a lot of Latin and funk, and so a lot of those just kind of eclectic rhythms and notes and scales. I didn't know it at the time, but that really helped kind of ease me in when it came to jazz.
Yeah.
And once again, kind of going back to speech, I mean, it was like a conversation. And, you know, some of these rhythms, you're like, how on God's earth do you play this?
Yeah.
And it's like, just make it fit in 4 beats. Here are all the notes, make it fit, you know, this is where you're going to start, this is where you're going to end, articulate it like this. And then, yeah, as long as we meet together at the end, we're all good.
Oh my gosh.
It's, well, yeah. It's something.
It is. I mean, any style you have to learn that vocabulary. You have to learn how to speak it, you know, musically speaking. You have to learn how to speak it. I mean, it took me a while when I was in grad school just learning classical, you know. There was a lot to kind of figure out how you shape the line. Because rock is one thing, you know. It's a lot of us just grow up with it, and I would imagine rock is an easier
right.
Or even blues is an easier thing to access because we've heard it all our lives. Yeah. You know, if you listen to the radio, jazz or classical, it's almost something you have to seek out to understand how to interpret it and play it. You know, where rock, it's like kind of like as soon as you get it, you get it.
Well, and see, so I actually kind of had the reverse problem. So because I started, once again, since you know the guitar path really kind of opened up in 2015. Jazz was my standard. Mm-hmm. You know, I dabbled in, you know, Santana, Metallica, the whole nine, like every other high school boy at the time. But it was actually once I got out of university, started traveling around and playing, it was hard turning that switch off. So people were like, dude, we're trying to play rock. Good God, quit swinging. I'm like, I don't, you know, it's so hard to not do that anymore.
Yeah, to find a Steely Dan cover band.
Right.
To throw in jazz, man.
Oh, man.
All right, so you finished university, you got this music degree, and you said it wasn't particularly just straight up performance. You had business and other things in there. So you finish, and then where does life take you musically after you finish in school?
Yeah, so after graduation, all my friends were getting married or getting their masters, and neither one of those was for me at the time. And so I was like, you know, I'd always wanted to go to New Zealand. Always. Really? Lord of the Rings nerd. And
I'm with you.
And so I had saved up over several years, just hoarded money away.
Yeah.
Did some research, found the working holiday visa, and was able to go over there. Basically didn't know anyone, didn't know anything, but was able to go through woofing and
I'm sorry, woofing.
So it's a World Wildlife Organic something farmers. It was basically where you would tender match with these families, and then they would say, okay, look, we're going to give you housing, so we're going to give you a place to live, and we're going to feed you, and if we do any trips out and around, we'll take you with. And on your end, you know, we'll have a farm. We have just like household responsibilities that need to be taken care of that we need your help with. So they'll kind of detail it out. You know, it might be 3 to 5 hours a day. You help out, do these things. In return, you get all these benefits. And it was really cool because instead of experiencing the culture from a tourist lens and going to the tourist cities and doing all the touristy things, you got to see it from the people who actually live there. And it was a totally different experience than I'd ever had with any of my former traveling. So,
did you get to do any touristy stuff?
Yeah, so I did that for 6 months and then worked hard after that. So I had my working holiday visa, so I was allowed to work. Did some stuff on some local vineyards in Marlboro. So now, you know, when I get my Sauvignon Blanc, I'm like, you know, these are the vineyards. I busted my butt for 13 plus hours a day. You know, it was 70, 80 hour work weeks.
Wow.
And it was excruciating, but with what I was able to save from that, I was able to
Travel.
have some fun. Yeah.
That's great, man.
But,
I envy you because I don't have that travel bug. And although I do want to visit Japan at some point, that's been on my list. But two things keep me away. One, it's like a 17-hour flight or something like that, which is just like, I don't like to fly. And two, when you get there, you can't stay for like a week. It's not the kind of place, you know, when you travel that far, you don't just go for a week and then come home because it's so far.
No.
And like I have former students or current students, and they travel back and forth to India. And I always talk to the parents, and they say, you know, oh, no, we don't go for like, you know, we're not going for 2 weeks. You know, we go for months.
Yeah.
You know, so they'll leave like maybe in June at the end of school, and then maybe when they come back in September, they might not even come back till like October or something like that because it's that long, you know. And of course they have family there and all that kind of stuff, but yeah, that traveling thing is just and I don't like to be away from home for too long.
Fair.
You know?
That's fair. Well, that's what was kind of cool. So spent a good bit of time in Wellington, and there's a university there which is very prominent in jazz, and I'm blanking on. I know everyone's going to hate me for forgetting this. But the man that did all the sound for Lord of the Rings and all those big films, John Williams, maybe. Anyway, I'm thinking Star Wars. Anyway, sorry.
That's all right. You can Google that.
So edit that out later. No, but yeah, and so he would partner with a lot of the kids from that university.
Oh, seriously?
And so some of the cats I would meet, they're like, oh yeah, we've worked with him, you know, a couple summers ago, or we'd drop in. But because that university was so important with that town, there was a huge acceptance for jazz like I've never seen. So I would actually see people performing just straight up jazz, busking successfully, which I was like, dude, there's no way I feel like I would see that in America unless you're like New York or, you know, something like that.
Howard Shore. I Google it. He did film composition for Lord of the Rings. Gosh. So, and that's funny because you don't find many jazz buskers in the States, at least where I've seen busking done. Normally, I mean, maybe in New York City. Right. But generally, I think it's the kind of thing it has been elevated to a certain level where it is in universities. Right. It is in clubs dedicated to that style of music. Jazz is it's a little more heady. Yeah. You know, it's on the level of like classical. You kind of almost have to understand it. Yeah. You know, and that's why a lot of people don't listen to it, I think, is because they don't understand it.
Yeah. And possibly unpopular opinion, but and I don't blame them. So, you know, when you kind of look at the history of it, when it comes to bebop especially, you know, that's what a lot of people, I think, when they think of jazz, they think of that bebop. Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you're having a stroke on the stage. And, you know, the point was the jazz, you know, some of the big band, Glenn Miller, all that stuff was getting commercialized. Yeah. And they were same problems we have now, right? Oh, these big companies taking this music and they're selling out, you know, just to make a buck and, you know, Taylor Swift, and so they're like, we're going to make something so complex and so on the surface, just what the heck, that they won't even want to do that. Right. And so that's kind of where that comes from. So from the perspective of learning the instrument, I think it's incredible. I'm really selective in the jazz I listen to. You know, Wes Montgomery is great. He was definitely a big inspiration. But honestly, my favorite was a man called Grant Green.
Grant Green's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit lesser known, but I loved his rhythms and the feel he would put into it. It wasn't always, you know, look how many notes I can play, look how fast I can play. It was very vocal. And yeah, I always gravitated more to his approach inside of things, and especially when it came to integrating that into the music I was playing. And even in college, so I was in leading up music fraternity, Phi Mu Alpha, for a couple years, and I had the thing my junior year. I was like, dude, how do we have all these musicians and we don't have a band? And so we created what was dubbed the Four Chords Band until we came up with a name, but the name was never made. So Four Chords Band stuck. But the joke was, you know, we're gonna con the public. So we're gonna take their music that they know and love, the popular music, and then we're gonna integrate our jazz. And so it was this kind of meet halfway where we'll play your music,
right,
but our way. And it worked so amazingly well. You know, we had the trombones, the saxophones, guitar. Our bass player was a sousaphone player, and I still play with him today, Max. And yeah, it was just, you know, we had a vocalist as well. And so it was very unique, kind of New Orleans brass band kind of feel to it, but very lively. And yeah, everyone latched onto it really well.
Speaking of that, have you checked out the local group Jazz is Led? So
no.
They play all Led Zeppelin tunes, but they do it in a jazz way.
Okay.
Yeah. Great bunch of guys in there. It's Curtis Wingfield's group with other fellows in there. So Curtis Wingfield on drums. And I'm just going to just look it up. It's fantastic. You'll love it. And that seems to be a good thing because I know those guys took it off of, I think, took this kind of, I don't want to say stole the name, but they kind of borrowed similarity from another group that was doing Jazz is Dead, and they were doing Grateful Dead tunes in the jazzy way.
Nice.
So that kind of goes along with what you're talking about with doing pop tunes in a jazz way, which has become, you know, I mean, Miles Davis did that Cyndi Lauper song, right? Do you know what I'm talking about? Mm-mm. Oh, God. Oh, man. Now it's going to bug me. Anyway, Miles Davis did it, as if I remember, he did do it. We're going to have to edit this, and I'm going to have to find it out. And I'll go back. Otherwise, we'll just leave it like it is because I'm lazy with the editing in the podcast.
Right. Makes it more relatable, man. Yeah.
All right, so you're finished. You're doing jazz things when you're done. How do you get into doing this guitar and singing stuff?
Yeah, so actually when I was in New Zealand, I joined a band. They had this app. I think it might have made it to the States, but it didn't get as big as it was over there. It started with a V. Once again, based off Tinder. This dates everything.
That's the model.
It is the model. And you would Tinder match with these other musicians. And I think that's why it fell apart, because people actually started using it for those purposes as opposed to like, hey, I'm actually looking for a competent musician, you know?
I'm looking for a date.
What? Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what it turned into, I think. But yeah, and so I was going through, and this one group was like, hey, we're looking for a guitar player. And I was like, what? No one is ever looking for a guitar player. Like, that is the most oversaturated instrument in the market. Like, wow. So I jumped in. Their guy I had to go back to Canada. His visa expired, and I just kind of filled the gap. And band started off as We Are Ghuznee. It was because they were based off Ghuznee Street in Wellington. And then there were some conflicts with the drummer, so we had to rename to We Are Home. Mm-hmm. And yeah, man, God, we were doing busking, street markets, got to play on the radio while we were there. I mean, in just a few months, I never felt like there was a hand just accelerating my life. It was just unreal.
It's called age.
Yeah, just the amount of life that came in those few months was just, it was like what you'd expect over years.
Yeah.
So it's just incredible, and I'm so thankful to everyone I was able to meet in that band and grow and learn. They did so much for me.
So you're just playing at the time. You weren't singing at all yet.
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah, playing and trying to undo some of the jazz tendencies. But so that's actually where saxophone came in. So once again, started trying to kind of busk and maybe sing a little bit. I was starting to kind of play with that while I was there, but nothing official yet. And it was really hard to turn heads with guitar. I mean, you had to be that 0.003% with honors to make someone look twice at you if you were playing guitar, busking on the streets. It's just how high the bar was set. That John Butler kind of level guitar playing.
Sure.
And, but while I was, walking through the town, I found 3 horn players.
Okay.
And one was amazing. The other 2 were all right. But there was that novelty with the saxophone that just drew everyone in. And listening to those guys, I was like, I think I could do that. And so I did. So we went to the local music store. We rented a horn, and I started to integrate the saxophone into the band. And that just, oh my gosh.
Changed it.
Minute that horn came out, people just flooded around. The tips came in like nobody's business. And actually going back to university, so I didn't do marching band my freshman year because I didn't want to be all music. I wanted to kind of branch out. And so my sophomore year, I did drumline. I've always wanted to do drumline. And much to the chagrin of one of the professors that kept trying to get me on Barry sax. And so, but my junior year, he bribed me. He's like, hey, here's a bunch of money. So I sold out a little bit. And he was like, here's the money. I want you for a solo, and we'll give you this, title. You're in charge of all the woodwinds.
Yeah.
But it was tenor saxophone, and I'd only ever played Barry saxophone. Well, through a stroke of kind of like irresponsibility, I never printed off the music. So all the music I learned how to play, I learned by listening to the guys around me.
Interesting.
Little did I know how much that would benefit me, because every time I've played horn, saxophone, tenor saxophone, it's been, what's that vocal line, the verse, the chorus, whatever.
Right.
Let me play that on the saxophone. And so by learning that way on that saxophone specifically has helped me out. It's just been perfect.
So I'm going to be ignorant because I don't really know. What is the big difference between the Barry and the tenor besides, pitch?
Yeah,
low, one's lower, one's higher. But what's the difference?
Yeah, so it kind of comes into, I think this rule is stupid and they should undo it. I'm going to put that out there. But, say you play a C on piano.
Okay.
On a Barry sax or an alto saxophone, I would have to play an E flat. Or it would come out as an E flat. And so if I played a C, it would come out as an E flat.
Right.
And so for tenor saxophone, it's a B flat instrument. So there was a slight variation.
Transposition.
Yes. And so by just going off of, ooh, I hear this pitch, bum, okay, that's this note. And being able to put fingers to it that way.
Yeah.
That's a lot stronger on a tenor saxophone as opposed to Barry saxophone or alto. I would have to think about it and kind of play around a little bit more.
And what is it? Soprano sax is the one that almost looks like, I don't want to say
Kenny
flute.
G.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not thinking Kenny G, but I am thinking John Coltrane, because I see John Coltrane play play that before. Okay, so the Barry's bigger, tenor sax is right in the middle, and then you got soprano.
Yep.
Is there a bass sax?
There is a bass sax. It's pretty much a Barry sax, but I think you get like one more note.
Okay.
And it is so much more expensive. I don't think it's worth it unless unless you're going to shove that traffic cone down the bell. But yeah, and so then I started working at a music shop. I won't go too far because we might go.
You're back in Charlotte, or are you still in New Zealand?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes, that was New Zealand, and then. Well, I guess we'll stay in New Zealand for right now. Yeah, and then that's where the horn really started to kind of take off, and starting to play with other people, and kind of see what that's like, kind of being out on my own like that. So
then your time in New Zealand ends, and then you come back to Charlotte. How long are you in New Zealand for?
So that was a year.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so
that's traveling. That is traveling.
Yes. And then, so then I was back in North Carolina.
Okay.
Wasn't really sure. So actually, I didn't know I was going to have to leave until 24 hours before I did. I was determined I'm going to get I'm going to re-up my visa. I'm going to stay here. I fell in love. I didn't want to leave.
Right.
And, so I was trying to work out these different visas, and one didn't work. And so I was kind of going broke, having to pay for all these visa fees and all the medical costs because I wasn't covered because the way their system's set up and everything. And, and thinking back, I worked at a hostel at the Trek Global hostel, and the owner actually told me without telling me that he was like, oh yeah, I help people get visas all the time. That just never clicked. And I was like, and they were they were getting me up because they wanted an English native speaker at like a higher up position. So thinking back, I was like, totally could have done that. But I'm glad it didn't happen because life went pretty well. And so within 24 hours, I had to tell everyone bye. I was like, sorry guys, I've been trying to get this to work, and I really, really thought
you were staying.
I was gonna stay, and then visa was running out, so I was like, I've got to leave. So I did. So I was back home, didn't really know what I was going to do. And my buddy Max worked at Music and Arts. And my senior year, when I was at UNC Pembroke, we got hit really hard by Hurricane Matthew.
Okay.
Like really hard, because we had a monsoon beforehand. So like it was all over the news and this whole thing. So I got flooded out just before my senior recital. So I couldn't get access to my instrument. My guitar was locked up. Couldn't get to it. The power was out. Flooding up to my waist. And so my parents were able to come down and get me out. And I went to Music and Arts. And went up. I was like, hey, man, I'll buy a pack of strings. Can I just practice and get ready for my senior recital? Dude, I was there for like 8 to 12 hours that day. And I was just practicing, shedding the songs. And every now and again, this older guy would just like come out, hover over my shoulder, watch me, and then would disappear and go teach lessons. Would come back. It was happening for hours. And then finally, his last lesson, the place was shutting down. He was like, man, like, got a really great touch. I love your, can I introduce himself? He's like, my name is Mike Hager, and really took me under his wing. I kind of call him my musical adopted father for Charlotte. He just introduced me to Omari and all these big cats here in Charlotte. Excuse me. And, yeah. And so from that, when I was thinking about, okay, I've got to get a job, we got to start, I was like, Music and Arts. And so I put in the application, cited those two guys. I was like, oh, I know these guys. They put in some words for me. And so I've only had one, what do you call those? Not auditions, but when you're going for a job.
Interviews?
Yeah, one job interview in my life. I didn't get it. And so, this wasn't one of those. It was just like, okay, like you're basically hired because everyone spoke so highly. They love you. It's awesome. And yeah, and so I got working there, and I was in sales. So I did sales for a couple years.
Oh, you weren't teaching?
No.
Okay, I thought you were. I thought you were going into teaching.
Yeah,
okay.
No. So it's really cool how all this kind of builds up. And so I got really good at sales, and I always thought, I was like, oh, those sales guys are schmucks. And I was like, by the end, my total sales goal, I doubled. I was like the best sales guy in the store.
There you go.
Yeah. And, but it was because I didn't take that approach of, I'm trying to sell you something. It was, hey, I see you. Hey, man, I remember you last time. You were looking for those bass strings. Right. How's that going? Like, trying to break those barriers. And that store really became a home for me. Especially, Rachel Carpenter was a manager at the time and just really did incredible things. And so I try to really nurture that for everyone that came in. And so it was probably about the second year.
This is at the Music and Arts in Pembroke?
Charlotte. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So this is the one in the Arboretum.
Oh, okay.
And yeah. And so I was actually, once again, travel bug. I was going to leave. And so I was like, hey guys, you're only going to get a year from me, and I'm going to Ireland. I've got this visa and was gonna go to Dublin, and some shenanigans happened at the store from past managers, and it was a mess. And I was like, I can't. Once again, I kind of suffer from this really annoying thing called conscience. And I was like, I can't, in good conscience, just like so many people have poured so much into me. I can't just take that and, deuces, I'm out the door. So I was like, okay, I will give you one more year of my life, but then I'm out. And that's what is happening.
1 year's a long time to commit to somebody.
Yeah. And so did that, and they kind of made me the, what we always joked is the lesson guru. And one of the things we were trying to fix with that store was the relationships between the teachers and the staff. And not that there was necessarily anything wrong, but there's just a divide. There's teachers stayed in their rooms, staff stayed out behind the counter. And so we really try to help bridge that and to kind of bring them in. So my job, on top of everything else, I had to manage over 500 lesson accounts. So I got really good with scheduling and hassling people for finances, contracts, the whole nine.
Right.
But then I got to talk with all of these amazing instructors. How do you teach? Why do you teach? What books do you use? Why do you use those books? What's important to you? Like, what's the point of each lesson?
Sure.
And getting into those weeds over the course of a year with all those different instructors. And I don't know, it was just really incredible being able to just pick the brains of all these guys and learn a lot about all these different instruments, which also helped from the sales point of view too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so all of that had happened, and then I was leaving. It was March. I had my visa for Australia. I was going to Sydney. I was working out a thing with Hillsong. So I was like, okay, I'll kind of do this, like getting in with them. Then maybe I can schmooze my way in. I'll do some busking. I still really didn't have a plan, but I was like, I'll take care of it. It's all right. And 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 then 3 days before my plane took off, COVID hit, and so everything got shut down. And so I had quit my job. I canceled my lease. I had, did everything that was needed to do to go that way, and that happened. And so it was awkward.
Did you go back to music and arts?
No,
because
so they were basically shut down.
I was teaching there before COVID, and then as soon as COVID hit, they changed a lot of things. You know, they shut down for a little bit, the lessons and stuff. And then when they started lessons up again, it was good for a short time. And then, I won't go into it, but they started to change some of their policies, which I didn't fit me well.
Sorry.
As a teacher.
I'll go into that for you.
So,
not from a trash point of view, but I completely agree. Teachers were completely in the right. And so, so this was in the few months where it was completely shut down.
Yeah.
No one was allowed in. No one really knew what was going on. And so I was doing some random, Amazon delivery, whatever it was, just to try to make some money. Sold a lot of my gear, all those wonderful JHS pedals. And, And so my now wife and I we were dating at the time, and we're house sitting at her cousin's up in Winston-Salem, and 9:00 at night. And then Rachel, the manager, reached out to me. She's like, "Hey, Jess Seda, the instructor you had when you were 8 years old, left." I didn't know why he left at the time, but she's like, "He left. He was teaching 50 to 60 students." She was like, "We need someone. We need a guitar instructor." She's like, I know you've been you've started to do this on the side now. You've told me that's where your heart is. You really want to get more into the teaching point of things. Is that something you'd be open to do? We'll have you as the first guitar instructor in the store. So I was all over it. I was like, how full circle is this? I'm replacing, the teacher I had when I was a kid. So it was really cool. And Jess is incredible. And even when he was in the store, we were, good friends. He taught me a lot and showed me a lot. And so I was able to go into the store. Then I found out, kind of to your point, the reason he left, and a lot of teachers, was because they had shifted the contract. So instead of, usually, hey, it'll be 60-40 split, 75-25 split, whatever it was, they try to take it more as an hourly wage, and then we'll give you a spiff if you're doing that. Well, when you analyzed everything and compared apples to apples at the end of the day, it never really worked out unless you were going to do full time.
Right.
But what the teachers didn't know, but I knew because I was in the sales part of the thing, was they were on a big hiring push. Well, then supply demand, if I get a whole bunch of supply, no one's getting full time, which means no one gets those benefits, which means I'm able to keep you for half the price. And so now you're shirking your teachers, who, by the way, the teachers, that lesson program is the only reason music and arts is even in business, and is because they're tethered to Guitar Center. That's a sinking ship, is the only reason they were in business. It's like you've taken the one good thing and you've stabbed those people in the back.
Yeah. And
I'm just fan. You treat your people well, especially the people who really add value to what you do.
Yeah, that was part of the problem. I was there, and I'm a teacher already for the public school system. And it was a side hustle, teaching guitar. I didn't need that many students. I taught on maybe one day during the week and on Saturdays and possibly on Sundays. I think if I had 10 students, that was a lot. And I was fine with that. I was like, this is cool. I just need a couple extra students, extra income. And then when they started to change stuff, they had approached me and told me, we're going to do benefits. I said, I don't need benefits. Right. What do you mean? I was like, well, I'm a school teacher. I was like, I've got benefits through the state, and I've got a pension, stuff I don't need to worry about. And they're like, oh, well, this, that, and the other thing. And I was like, it doesn't sound like you guys are going to really have a place for me here. And they're like, yeah, we're probably not, because we want to make you full time. And they also wanted teachers not to teach, but when you weren't teaching, they wanted you to work the floor. Right. They wanted you to go out and do sales. And I'm like, that's not why I'm here. I'm not doing sales. That's fine if that's what somebody gets hired to do, but you're not going to tell me as the guitar teacher, hey, you need to go out and sell guitars now. No. No.
And especially because even if you sold a guitar, you wouldn't be getting commission because of how you were labeled under the system. So
There you go.
there's that too.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, fast forward, I wound up leaving, but I was there a short time ago buying strings.
No.
And I talked to one of the managers at the store I was at. And they were like, "Hey, we're looking for guitar teachers. Would you be interested?" And I briefly went into the story. He's like, "Oh yeah, that policy is no more. We don't do that anymore. They changed it." And I was like, "Okay, I guess it didn't work out."
No.
And they started realizing that it wasn't working out. Don't quote me on that, people. I mean, if you're going for a job there, that might be something you want to investigate for yourselves. I mean, it's a great store. I really enjoyed working there. There's great staff. There were great teachers, but much to what you were saying, when I left, I wasn't the only one. There were a few other teachers who left, and some of them took all their students.
And that's the thing. There was a no competition clause.
You can't enforce that.
So, right. And so they could. So they could go and take the students afterwards and everything. But yeah, and I don't blame it at all, because a lot of the teachers were old school. I mean, they'd been there for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And kind of doing that to them was a pretty big smack in the face. And and so I was young and I was looking to teach, and they're like, "Hey, here's like 50 students." So I was like, you know what, and I'd work sales, so I was like, I know how to sell. I can, I would do that naturally anyway.
Right.
So yeah, I did that for a while, and it was really great because I was able to kind of hash out a lot of the, it's like a first kid, hash out all the mistakes on the first few students and refine the process as we go, kind of see what works, what doesn't work.
It's kind of a difficult thing, teaching, though. You don't know when you first start out teaching guitar, and I always feel bad because I think back, and I've been teaching guitar. Oh my God, I feel old. Over 25 years. And I always feel bad for those first students I taught, because I didn't know exactly what I was doing.
Right. And you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah, that's very true. But you don't. One of the things is that a lot of people teach the way that they have been taught. So, but as you progress and you become hopefully better, because if you're teaching, I don't care if it's guitar, I don't care if it's public school.
Yeah.
You want to hopefully refine what you're teaching and get better at it so that you can enable people. And I always feel bad for those people who first took lessons with me. Not that I didn't do a good job, and not that I didn't care, and not that I don't want them to get better. I'm not the teacher I am now, where I'm like, I have a total system of how I teach everybody.
Systems and processes.
Some might say cookie cutter, but I have a whole way that I teach, and it's like, it works. Yeah. That's it. It works. At least for the beginning stages, and then I can change things up. But the beginning stages is always this, and this.
Well, those fundamentals are good. And we talked about that at coffee the other day, was having that foundation, because if you don't have that concrete, which I think is, concrete foundation to start off of, everything else is fairly abstract. You don't have any frame of reference. And so by having that foundation, then we can go off on our unique little whatever just for you, but we need the basics first that we can kind of build off it. And that's that's something I learned from talking to teachers and lesson parents is, I saw some teachers that would take it to a point of, and even had this in college, of like this one size fits all way of teaching, of like, everyone is going to learn these songs in these orders all the way through the book on this, that, the third. And there wasn't a lot of room for the student to come in with their own personal goals. And then I've seen the other end of the spectrum of, cool, man, what do you want to learn today? And, cool. And we'll start a song, and then next week, who knows, it might be a different song, man. And threading that needle. And it's a continual challenge. I mean, it's something I'll do full on personality. Like, I feel like a little psychiatrist somehow. Write down each student, how's the engagement been? Has there been a shift? What's going on? Where are they at? Do we need to maybe tweak some things here and there? Change the approach a little bit. And so that's kind of led into my approach now. So I'm very, essential pillar for me has been adaptability. And so I have a sheet when they come in, and, who are your favorite artists to listen to? Who are some of your favorite artists on that instrument? Mm-hmm. And then what are just some goals you have? And trying to see, why are you here and what gets you excited about this instrument? Mm-hmm. Because if I can tap into that, It might be, okay, we're going to write a guitar part for Machine Gun Kelly, or we're going to do Beethoven, like whatever it is.
Right.
But if I can tap into your interests and then manipulate it in a way that's appropriate for what we're learning right now, then I'm able to use your engagement's going to be maximized through that process.
Right.
Because now it's something you want to do, and I'm able to sneak in my curriculum through that.
Right.
And so that's been a big thing for me, paired with, and this is actually why I left music and arts, was recitals and music outreach. There are some students who are just like, hey man, I just want to play in my shed
Right.
by myself, whatever, hang out with friends. Hey, go nuts. But a lot of students, parents too, really want to go out and be on a stage, go perform at cafes or churches or parks and this, that, and the third. And so doing that and partnering with retirement homes, and we have one coming up this August as well, just to get out and see, look, you guys have worked so hard at refining your gifts. Now let's take it and let's give it away. Let's see what can happen when we use this for something positive, like for people in a retirement home who may never see their family again, who, some of them, the family's on the other coast or, whatever. There are some incredible stories at those, but yeah, just kind of getting outside of yourself and kind of giving that back. And when I was getting a lot of pushback from corporate because they were trying to do all these freebie lessons, and I'm like, first off, what I do is not free. It's not worth free.
Right.
And so you're kind of devaluing and all this kind of stuff. And so I was like, I'm not going to, I think you talked on it earlier where it's like, I shouldn't have to fight this hard.
Yeah.
Oh no. So when we were talking about bookings, before this, and it was like, for something just this, just like good, like wholeheartedly just good, I shouldn't have to fight tooth and nail to have my kids perform at a retirement home. It's kind of messed up. And so I was like, okay, we're not going to be rash. We're going to be logical and, fight that musicianly emotional urge. And I was like, okay, already had some students on my own, completely outside of music and arts. I was like, I'm just going to remove Thursdays. Thursdays are my lightest days. I'll keep working the other 4 or 5 days I'm there out of the week. So the process that I expected to have taken months, if not a year, 3 weeks. So what happened was when I left, all my Thursday students were like, but we want to take with you. I'm like, but all my other days are completely booked. And they're like, well, that's because people kind of like you. I was like, I guess, I don't know. And so I sent out an email, and because there's no competition clause, so we could kind of, go along afterwards. I was like, all right, look, option one, if there are any availabilities I have throughout the rest of the week, we can try to move. Option number two, there are some really great instructors. I recommend X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Option three, well, not even option three. It was just education. It was option number three is I'm leaving because I'm starting my own business. I'm going to be teaching on the side where I drive to my students' houses and give private one-on-one hour-long lessons. And I was like, you make that decision. I'm going to give you all the facts, as unbiased as I possibly can.
Yeah.
And then the parents, I'm like, I trust you to know what's best for your kids and, for the kids, and y'all can hash out amongst yourself. Get back to me. And so that's what I did. And 100% of my students tried to take with me. Obviously I couldn't fit them all.
Sure.
But it was incredible, and I was very humbled. But yeah. And so all the Thursdays students had to get moved, and they're like, well, I want to keep taking with you. So then I added them, but because I'm doing an hour long instead of 30 minutes, well, now that day got booked up.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now I got to get rid of Fridays.
Yeah.
And then it was just this domino effect that led until I kind of went and had a full studio on my own within a month.
Man, you just gave me a great idea. Just sidetrack while we were talking about this. I would love, if there's any music lawyers in Charlotte, get in touch with me. I'd love to have you on. I'd love to talk about that non-compete clause that they put in, because I'm not really sure that's enforceable. Like, you could say it. I think it's like a veiled threat in a way, because one, you can't control where students are going to study. So if you leave, Those students can go study with you. And what's their mile marker? You can't compete with us within a 2-mile radius, a 5-mile radius in the city of Charlotte. Like, I don't even live in this part of Charlotte anymore in whatever, South Charlotte. You're going to say I can't teach in North Charlotte?
Yeah. Well, I never thought about that from the point of the consumer of like, you're denying them that opportunity.
Yeah.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. Wait, what's like you saying the student can't leave, and is it a non-compete clause with just the student or the teacher? You can't compete with us. Yeah. What if I went to the next county? No. I don't think it's enforceable. And I say that because when I used to live in Cleveland, one of the music schools, it was a great place to work. I loved working there. They thought about trying to do that with the teachers. And we were just like, yeah, that's not going to fly. Like, and what lawyer is going to come in and go, we're going to sue a guitar teacher for, $500,000 for taking students or trying to like earn a living? Like, I'm sure a judge would kind of like throw that out of a court.
And I think that just screams insecurity. I'm like, if you're really good at what you do, shouldn't be faced.
Yeah.
Like, you should have you should be so competitive in what you do that even if I leave, the students should want to stay with you because you have something exceptional to offer. Yes. We kind of touched about this before. It was a hard thing for me. And this is a totally me personal kind of thing. But we had kind of talked about my venue list, and I'm a huge nerd for Excel sheets. Yay, that kind of happened when I was 25.
I told you I do that too. I mean, if you're a musician,
especially working sales, and that's where it came from, sales and color coding the whole nine. And so I developed that, and I had some close friends who were like, hey, I'm wanting maybe to try to get established in Charlotte. Do you have any leads? And I had the thought, I was like, well, I could give them that list. And little voice in the back of my head was like, but if you give them that list, they don't get your gigs. And I was like, oh, like, do I want to? And really what hit it for me was, why am I doing this? And it's like, for me, it's through the music that I'm able to go and connect with the people in my community and kind of love on them and just get to know them.
Yeah.
And number one, and number two, that's going to force me to be pretty good. So I'm like, if there are more people in that proverbial, if there's more supply, I'm going to have to get sexier on the saxophone. I'm going to have to be better on guitar, pull out some bells and whistles. And, it's going to push me to be more creative. And I feel like it's just, yeah.
Well, the thing with music and arts is, and it's not, honestly, it's just not music and arts. It's any music school or music store. And when I say school, I don't mean a formal university or something like that. I'm really talking about a place that offers lessons for students. That's the kind of thing where the school is just the umbrella. It's the people that work there that the students go to. Like they'll first go to the school because it's a known quantity, right? Music and Arts or Sam Asher Guitar Center or anywhere has a storefront, and
formerly Sam Ash.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Too soon. Aren't
they just? Well, we'll go into that later. Before we get sidetracked. They are the umbrella which everybody works under, and the students are not. At first, they're attracted to the storefront, right? They go into music and arts. They buy a guitar. They get hooked up with lessons to do that guitar. But it's you, the teacher, and your personality and what you are giving out to the student that the students then become attracted to the teacher and the music. And sometimes I've had students come in and they don't practice. They just like coming in, and this is over time. They like to talk and they like to hang out and they do their thing. And particularly adults, it's their time away from other things. And, they'll learn how to play. But one thing a professor in college told me years ago, which was just eye-opening for me, it was pertaining to teaching. And they had said, these other things that you can learn about teaching. What you can't teach is personality. And students, young kids, because I work with kids, are attracted to your personality. And you can't teach that. You either have that kind of personality that kids are drawn to or people are drawn to when you're in a teaching situation, or you're not.
Right.
Hence, them saying, you can't do this, or a non-disclosure agreement.
No.
Or excuse me, non-disclosure, a non-compete clause.
Right.
That's not something you can do because they're coming to you after a while. They're not coming to the store. The store is just the physical place for the lesson. The person, the teacher, is the lesson.
Yeah. Well, and that's where, I had a big thing in college talking to some guys that your private life is not private at all.
Yeah.
And so I've seen how
not musically, not when you're a musician.
Right. Yeah, well, that too. But yeah, like the choices you make in your quote unquote private life will affect you. And so when you go out into the public sphere with your work, with whatever, that will bleed over. You can't escape you. Like you still follow you know? And, I've really seen that. And I've even told my students, I'm like, look, and I think it probably came from a Simon Sinek book or podcast.
I like Simon Sinek.
Yeah, he's got some great nuggets. But it was, and I'll tell my kids up front, I'm like, if I died today, you could get another guitar teacher like that.
Right.
No problem. So, and then once again, from a business analytic point of view, what then can I do? What assets can I leverage to put myself ahead that is more than just I teach guitar?
Right.
Because if there's say 1,000 people in Charlotte that can quote unquote teach guitar, what can I do that they can't? Or what's unique? And I feel like that's where a lot of that personality comes in. That's where taking it above and beyond. And you touched on this a second ago, but one of my favorite moments is when I have that quiet kid or, the high school boy who's, going through and starts to open up.
Yeah.
And when I can ask something as simple as, hey man, how's your weekend? Or how's your day been? And instead of just a shallow, it's good, they'll go into, man, Susan in English class today was and tell me these stories. And I'm like, dude, how many parents just fight tooth and nail just to get that? And I'm like, the fact that they're willing to trust me and open up in that way, I'm like, that's incredible. I'm like, that's why I do it, to pour into them. I'm like, I get to see all these kids for 1 hour, once a week, every week. Okay, this is going to get a little dark, but real life mathematics. So with the number of kids I have, the statistical likelihood of one of them having gone through some kind of abuse or name the thing. I mean,
yes,
there's at least statistically 2 to 3 out of those I teach. And so it's I always try to approach it from, I have no idea what happens when I leave. Now, please, any parents that listen, I love you all. And I have no suspicions on any of my parents whatsoever. But, whether it's home or school or family, you don't know. And so I always try to be cognizant of that when I'm going into a house, not to just take for granted that everyone's had the week of their life, that, dude, someone could have passed away in the family. Yeah. And they're going through a really hard time. I had that with one of my students, and the grandmother had lived with them she'd moved in for the last several months. And that was a really serious, hard transition. Yeah. And to your point of, sometimes I would stay over an hour because we would just kind of talk about,
what's
that
been
kind of
on.
process and kind of working through it. Sure. And and I don't know. And for me, that's just more. It's, I'm not just a music teacher, but it's through the teaching I'm able to encourage these students, be there for the students, show them, hey man, we're going to go do recitals, we're going to do outreach, we're going to go help people, support people. Oh, you're interested in this? Let me give you the tools to train you to do this yourself. Sure. You want to go do gigs? Cool. Reach out to these people, study this for what kind of equipment you need. Now I've got one student who's 10 years old and is booking gigs down at the Starbucks or whatever it is, doing neighborhood things. Good. And I'm like, that's awesome. And that's what I want to help propel, is not just the time I'm there, but afterwards and forwards and 30 years from now when you have kids,
There are, and I know you're a bit younger than me, but when I left Cleveland, after I was teaching, now I used to teach 70 students a week plus in Cleveland. Yeah, I was a machine.
That's where all the hair went.
Pretty much fell out from teaching. So when I left and to move to Charlotte, I think I did really realize how many people's lives I had touched. Like, I mean, I got so many gifts and thank you cards and like all this stuff from people just like, man, you just this and this. And I still have students that I'm in touch with. And you're talking, it's almost 20 years that I've been gone from Cleveland. I am still in touch with them via Facebook and stuff, and parents. Oh, you know, you were just amazing. Or we still remember, you know, what a great time. The kids still talk about you, you know, all this time later. And you don't realize, you know, I had somebody call me. This is it just blows my mind. So I was working at this school in Charlotte. It's about, oh my gosh, let's just say I had been here about 6 or 7 years. Out of the blue, I get this message in my school mailbox at work. Such and such called. They want to talk to you. And they left them a number. I'm like, I don't even know who this is. You know, I was like, what parent is this? Nothing. I'm like, I don't know who this is. And I get the call again. And I'm like, all right. So finally, I'm like, all right, I'm going to call this person back. It is. Now, you're talking, this is 12 or 13 years later, maybe longer. It's a kid, no longer a kid, an adult male. I used to teach when he was like an 11-year-old boy. And he had called the store where I used to work looking for me. Well, hold on. He had gone to a music store, and I was on the roster of teachers, and I never taught there. But he went there looking for lessons for his daughter.
Oh, no way.
They had my number because I think I was still using my Cleveland number at the time. It was weird. He wound up tracking me down via the internet or something, found out where I worked, contacted me. And it was like, when I finally got in contact with him, I was just like, oh my God. He's like, do you remember me? And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know who you are. And then he's like, I used to come up to your apartment. My mom would drop me off for and I was like, oh my God. I was like, what is going on? I haven't talked to you in like, 12, 15 years, something like that. And he was telling me, I got a daughter and I was looking for lessons and I went over to Sam Ash and they had your name and number or your email. And oh man. So point being, you have no idea.
No.
X amount of years later, how much you trust someone's life. No. And even more to your point where you said what somebody's got going on, I'm sure you've seen it. There's that picture, and it's a picture of an iceberg in the water, and you always see the tip of the iceberg in the water, but there's this whole massive iceberg underneath. Case in point, the kid comes to you or somebody comes to you for their lesson. You see them walking in with a smile on that day. You have no idea what's going on underneath, and you kind of have to, you have to be aware of that, that somebody's got some other things going on, just like you do.
No. Well, it's funny you say that because I was actually thinking about that before you finished that story. That's something my dad, we were talking about. He's like, you're going to feel really old when one of your former students comes up to you married with kids and is like, hey, you used to teach me when I was a kid, can you teach my daughter? And I'm like, dude, this sounds surreal. But yeah, and so over summer I did love Google Forms and did a little Google form questionnaire for all the students. And it was just, what's important to you? Like, do you want to be, so it was ranking between 1 and 10. I got this out of a book and I think it's genius. So if anyone wants to steal it, I certainly did. So I want you to rank things between 1 and 10, but 7 is not allowed. And it's very funny. And everyone's like, why 7? I'm like, because if you think of like a, meh, okay, you'll usually put 7.
Yeah.
But then if you think between the number 6 and the number 8, it's a pretty stark difference between a 6 and an 8. So it really helps you make a decision one way or the other. And so 1 to 10, not including 7, between you want to sound really awesome in your bedroom, just playing out for yourself. Option number 2, you want to sound really cool and or play with your friends. Option 3, you want to like get out and actually play with people.
Right.
Like people you might not know. And I was incredibly surprised. Even some of the kids who I thought were like fairly introverted were like, dude, I want to like go out and play with people. And so over what, like 99% of my students answered back the same. And it was like, we want community. Like, I want to play with other people my age, and I just want to go out and have fun and play music live. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to tap into now is how can I lean into that? I looked into child labor laws. There's no like child exploitation for like having kids work and not paying them and all that kind of stuff, or paying them and then child labor. But it is legal. And so I'm like, okay, well, how can I get you gigs, you know, even if we split 2 hours between some of my top students? Yeah. The reason I can't do that often is because I have gigs and I have kids and a family and I need food on the table. Sure. So I can't do too many of these freebie recitals because that kind of eats into my income. But if I can get paid for giving you the opportunity to play, that's kind of like a middle ground. Then I can, you know, still throw a 20 in the tip jar or something. Yeah. But, you know, I'm setting up, I'm providing all my equipment, you're using the equipment, so on and so forth. Yeah, so I'm trying to lean more into that and just, hey, let's just go out, hang out, and go to the park. We'll have some food and games. And
well, that's the trouble teaching guitar for a livelihood. Mm. There's one thing I found when I was teaching for a long time is that there's a ceiling of how much money you make. Yeah. And as much as we love teaching and we enjoy and we share our art, you still need to buy groceries. Yeah. So one of the problems is you can teach more and more and more and more, but there's only a ceiling of how many students you're going to be able to teach and what time, and because you are the person there. Yeah. You're the teacher, right? So if you're not there, there's no lesson happening.
Exactly.
So hence you come up with whatever, different policies that you institute, price ranges. Mm-hmm. You know, I need to make this much money when I'm doing my job. And if I remember correctly, I'm not sure, so don't quote me on it. When I taught at Music and Arts, they did performances. They did studio recitals. Mm. And I think...
Were you in Concord?
Yes.
Yeah, Concord did really good about that. Because don't they have that stadium?
Yeah, they have a studio, a room for that. I want to say they charged $5 for each student to do the recital.
Oh, that's
to come
hilarious.
and perform. I'm not sure. I can't remember clearly. I'm pretty sure, but I don't know. I can't say for sure. And that it just went to the room rental fee. Mm. And I didn't have that many students, so it wasn't a big deal. Gotcha. But to your point of having kids perform, let's say you set it up at a coffee shop, or I know teachers who've set that kind of thing up at home. Yeah. I mean, that is an opportunity for teachers, and I'm not trying to milk parents or anything, but you know, come over. I'll have cookies and juice, and we have the stage, and we've got a sound system set up for the kids, and there's other people there. I don't think there's anything wrong with charging them for that because, look, man, I know parents who do their kids do soccer. Mm. They got to pay for the uniforms. They got to pay for 2 sets of uniforms, a home and away set of uniforms. They got to pay for equipment. Yeah. If they're on the traveling team, they're paying for the coaches for certain things, for food and travel. So, a small nominal fee outside of the lesson.
Well, and I've had...
Not necessarily bad.
So I've one of my lesson parents... a handful of them are very entrepreneurial and always kind of get the brain going with ideas. And he'd kind of mentioned something like that. Because of my past, I'm always really sensitive with that kind of stuff. So usually if people are like, hey, we can't, I'm like, all right, we'll figure something out. Or having like freebies with, retirement homes or something as a failsafe. But because usually, say coffee shop, or we did Woody's Seafood Saloon in Ballantyne last year, and for one of them, and it was, look, I will pack this place. And we did. There was not one table open. So it's like, you give me a time. It was like a Sunday afternoon. Once football's over, and this place is usually dead, you give me 1 hour. I will I'll fill the house up. And so I bring you business. You give me the stage. And so that kind of worked pretty good. I feel like for teachers who might not be at that capacity to be able to leverage that, maybe having something like that, where it's, hey, $5, because there are some places I've found, especially with the city, you can rent like city squares, like by the Watchtower. We did that in Rock Hill. This little circle. It was like $100. And so, to your point, if you can have, hey, I've got X number of kids, do the math to make this happen. We need this much per person. Music and Arts did $30 registration fee.
Right.
What that registration fee was for is to go towards recitals and things like that. So that was technically supposed to be the pool of money that you'd pull from for recitals, but they didn't do recitals. Well, my story. Anyway. And so, yeah, there are a few different ways that you can kind of go about it, but
yeah, I mean, you have to be, think a little outside of the box when it comes to that kind of stuff. And don't be afraid because, look, I was just thinking about where we're talking about it. In May, my school choir, we went to the Kannapolis Cannonballers and we sang the national anthem.
Awesome.
And I say that, and this is, I know this is just the way it is because a friend of mine also plays guitar and he goes to minor league baseball stadiums and he plays the national anthem too.
It's not Darren Deese, is it?
No.
Oh, okay.
The point is, my kids went to the stadium. They didn't pay them to go. They didn't pay the kids. They didn't get free tickets. Parents brought the kids. They bought tickets to the game for every kid in the choir. They bought food.
Oh man.
So you basically, the Kannapolis Cannonballers were providing the opportunity and the stage for the kids to perform on. And they sang the national anthem. But in exchange, you guys are coming to do this. You got to buy tickets to the game. And, you don't have to buy food, but I mean, it's there, buy food. And everybody had a great time. So, to think creatively to make an extra couple of dollars for yourself, for your livelihood is not a bad thing.
And even to give anyone ideas if they're wanting. So I've done group lessons in the past. And that amounted to like several $100s per hour.
Yeah.
So if you can find a way to do that, I don't live in Charlotte, so I have to drive an hour down. And I even had, because the relationships, some of my families were like, we will offer you our house to do this, even if we're not home. I was like, y'all are crazy. Thank you. And, but yeah. And so for that need, I've even had parents, I'm going to try it next year. But summertime, everyone does the camps.
Yeah.
And once again, leaning into that hunger for group lessons community. Many of my students are in school bands, so they might play trumpet, saxophone, clarinet.
Putting groups together.
Also, some sing, some are taking vocal lessons, some are taking drum lessons, playing bass. And so, how can I start to do duos, trios, and similar age range, similar music tastes.
School of Rock kind of stuff?
Kind of, yeah. But in a way, keeping it in-house, and something, we'll see if it ever gets to that point, but I've always thought about trying to do a bigger recital as well, but open it up to other teachers. The only problem is I've always had so many of my students wanting to play that my students kind of max it out. But
that's the kind of thing where you could offer coaching, as it were, and get 3 kids in the band, put them together and say, okay, we're going to do a band coaching thing, get the drummer, the bass player, and the singer together. And then if you get enough of those groups, you could go to a venue, to a restaurant and say, hey, I don't know if this is interest for you, but the kids are going to show up. I'm going to set up a PA. They're going to perform. Parents will be, I can guarantee probably there's going to be at least 20 people who show up, and they'll probably get food and they'll probably get drinks, at your venue for this. What do you think? And we could fill at least in, an hour of time.
Yeah. And once again, in the area we're at, so many, that's why I have to teach down here and not in Concord, is just the financial reality of where we're at. A lot of these parents are business owners, are higher end professions. And so their circle of friends, you'll be surprised. It might be, actually, we have a friend of the family that owns this coffee shop, this ice cream parlor, this random clothing store. But hey, why not have yoga in the middle of free people at Mondays at 7 a.m. or whatever?
Yeah.
My sister runs Free People's. That's what. But yeah, and you just don't. Yeah, Harris Teeter now, grocery stores now doing live music and everything.
I've played at Lowe's Foods. Wherever somebody's going to play. I mean, that doesn't bother me.
No.
All right, Nicholas. So we've been talking a lot about teaching. Let's get into the performing aspect. So you perform under the moniker, the Raven in the Road. I'm going with the Road would be from your last name, Nicholas Rhodes.
Ah, there you go. Kind of like that Christopher Walken. Monica.
What's yeah, we were watching. I was showing Nicholas a Instagram reel of some guy doing an impersonation of Christopher Walken earlier. So fill me in with the Raven in the Road. How did the name come about? It was a duo you were performing in, and you're mostly doing a lot of like top Billboard stuff.
Yeah,
songs.
Yeah. So to start from the beginning, so the Raven in the Road, that name, I've had that name since high school.
Really?
Yep. So when I was a kid, shout out Elliott Guitars. They're in Hidden Heights, North Carolina, and does amazing custom builds, guitars and also amps.
I've heard of them. Yes.
Yeah, and so double entendre. So on the surface, correct. So the Raven in the Road. My last name is Rhodes. Haha, not spelled the same. But so that's the Road, and then the Raven is actually the model of the red semi-hollow guitar I have.
Okay.
So that's surface level.
Wait, the guitar that you have, the Raven.
It's called the Raven.
Is that built by LA Guitars?
Yep.
Okay. What's the builder's name again? I forgot.
So his full name is Andy Elliott, but the business is Elliott Guitars.
Okay.
So yeah, they do.
Oh, I thought you said LA Guitars.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, I have heard good things about them as well, though. But yeah, and so kind of underneath the underlying layer too. So the Road kind of took the form of just life in general and never really having an exact destination. While there are definitely pit stops and milestones and things, I just always want to be growing, always want to be going into new places and stepping outside the comfort zones continually. And yeah, just growth and always moving. The Raven kind of comes back from Genesis. So a lot of people think, with Noah, the flood, the ark, the first bird that got released was the dove, but it's not. That's actually the second and I think the third. So the first was actually the Raven. And, you can watch some, I don't know if it'd be National Geographic or what the animal shows are nowadays. But some of the ravens and their ability to endure these extreme weather conditions and just these insane, I don't even know how to say it. Just hardships, and so their ability to endure and to go through it, I've always really related on. It's not the fastest animal, it's not the strongest, it's not the sexiest looking animal, but just its ability to endure and just to always push forward. I've always latched on to, and so kind of paired with the road of life and everything. And
so, are ravens different than crows? Different bird, or same bird, different name? Do you know?
I would think it would be a different bird. That's a good question.
I just always, dark birds. I didn't know if they were similar or just a different type of name. One's larger, one's smaller. I mean, it's a Google away, but I'd be really curious just because for some reason I associate them being the same type of bird or the same bird.
Yeah.
Just with different characteristics, maybe.
Okay, so they are slightly different.
Okay.
All right, so we ready? Birdfact.com. Next 30 seconds. All right. Physical differences. Ravens are larger and bulkier. Okay, so they're just pretty much all around bigger. Yeah. Okay.
Almost like alligators versus crocodiles, in a sense.
Yeah. Crows have a higher pitched caw and are more social. And I guess the opposite would be true for ravens. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Same bird, just a little.
And I've always kind of imagined crows more with like death and like scav- like that, like the vulture kind of. I don't know. That's what it's. But
crows are actually, in a sense, friendly. Like I have heard stories about crows. People they find stuff.
Huh.
And they will, like, there was a story, I don't know where it was. It's crazy. Now we're on this kick.
Right. I love it.
Some woman would leave. The story was like this woman had left stuff out for the crows to eat, and the crow had followed her around and brought and would would eat every day. And then the woman would go out shopping or something, and the crow actually followed her around.
Oh, wow.
And then I guess she dropped something one day and she forgot, didn't realize she dropped it. And the crow had picked it up and brought it back to the house for her.
Cool.
Like, it was some weird story. I'm sure you could find it on the internet somewhere. I remember reading it. I was like, no way. Is that even true? Like, but apparently they're pretty smart birds, crows.
Yeah.
So, okay. All right. Well, let's get off the bird fact.
All right.
All right. So you got the moniker, the Raven in the Road.
Yeah. And so I actually only started performing under that this year. So that was when I started the business. That was the initial business name, LLC. So we are legit.
Interesting.
And so prior to that, I'd been in a band and duo. It was called House 11, 11, the number, not House of 11. I've gotten them a few times and people have a few too many. I was like, don't get too excited. But yeah, and that was great. Once again, it kind of came from the New Orleans. It was kind of this similar theme, and I recognize the only constant is me, so if there's responsibility there, I'll happily take it. But going back, we had this band called Delia Few. Yes, it is. We failed backwards. I know that is like whatever. I get it. I thought it was funny. And anyway, so it was a New Orleans style brass band. We brought Natalie on later on in the game for vocals because we're like, the horns are cool, but to open up more doors, we need vocals somewhere. Yeah. So we brought her on, and what happened was there was a bit of a divide between, levels of, I'll say, seriousness, professional seriousness. And so some people wanted to do it just for a hobby at the time. Totally okay. Yeah. That's all right. Some of us wanted to really kick it up a notch and like really go do some stuff.
Yeah.
And we knew that kind of going, and it just got to the point where the roads were starting to diverge, and I didn't want the resentment to kick in and ruin the actual relationships I had with all those guys.
Gotcha.
And so it was just one of those. So yes, I broke it, and I was like, this is where I feel like it's going. We really want to hunker down, get a lot of stuff, move forward, go do a lot of big things. You guys, this is more of just a side thing for you.
Yes.
Totally respect it. No judgment. Like, dude, that's awesome. But now it's starting to conflict in such a way that we need to do different things.
Yeah.
And so from that, House 11 was kind of born. Started doing some full band stuff, and then we actually started doing some duos. So there's a gentleman, Michael Carlson, down here in Matthews, and I don't even know how we bumped into each other, but maybe it was music and arts. I actually think I restrung his guitar once. Anyway, and we bumped into him when we were playing at an Indian Trail. What's that? That venue we were talking about.
Tap and Vine?
Tap and Vine.
Yes.
Ran into him there and started doing some duo stuff with him. He's like, dude, I would love. He's like, I sing and play acoustic. Could you just do some electric guitar? And I was like, oh my gosh, Natalie and I could do this. So the duo really kicked off because she didn't fully play guitar at that time. I didn't fully sing. I might jump in a little bit, but it was mainly guitar. And so we kind of like made a whole person. Yeah. And so we were able to do a lot of these like solo venues. Yeah. We were able to get by as a duo. So we were doing that for a long time, did a whole bunch. I know we played well over 100 shows together. So we had a lot of time together playing. And and then it just kind of got to a point when, once again, I could start to feel kind of a divergence. I was like, personally, once again, my goal for music is I'm not just there to play my music, get my check and leave.
Sure.
I try to make it more than that. And so for me, this is a way for me to connect with the people around me through the music they like. So we'll get into that later with the Billboard hits, but let me relate to you with your music, with my style, lean into that, kind of tap into the nostalgia, and then get to know you, like build and nourish those relationships. And that was kind of getting to a head with just things like showing up on time and being prepared and attitudes and, just that kind of stuff. And once again, I could feel that resentment starting to build. And, it's like, I've known you for several years, a couple years at that point. And so we just kind of talked, and I was like, look, we're going different ways. Once again, there's no right or wrong.
Right.
It's an is.
Yeah.
Right. This is where you're deciding to go, and this is where I'm deciding to go.
Right.
And I want to break this off now before that resentment takes over and taints the personal relationship.
Sure.
Because I want us to still be able to hang out, have the kids, interact the whole nine.
Sure.
And so we agreed we were going to finish out in November, then go. Had a weird thing too. I was walking down the hall and I stopped. And I had to go to my wife. I was like, Natalie's pregnant. She's like, she told you? I was like, nope. She's pregnant. And I need someone for an I told you so moment. So this is it. 3 days later, she gets back to me. She comes back from vacation. Hey, I just wanted you to know you're one of the first people to know. I was like, you're pregnant. She goes, yes. I was like, no one's going to believe me. Confirm with Gloria. I was like, I knew. I was just, I've known you long enough. I don't know. I knew.
It's a vibe.
And that's happened so many times
You're
with
glowing.
her where I'm just, yeah. And, but so many things with her, it was always so funny. Like, I knew what would happen before they happened.
Yeah.
And so it was nice because it always gave me this time to kind of prepare beforehand and whatever. So I was never really caught off guard when I had to start going solo because I could feel that it was already starting to go that way.
Yeah.
I was cramming down solo songs. Okay, I've got 30 songs now. I've got 60 songs and so on and so forth. Yeah. And then, since she was pregnant too, as I can only imagine how tough that is of literally forming and multiplying, oh my gosh.
A pain men will
what
never
that
know.
takes out of you. Yeah. And so she had to cancel some gigs. She just wasn't feeling well. Totally understandably so.
Yeah.
And so I had to fill in some gigs last minute, which kind of pushed me into, well, you've been working on these songs, so time to do it. And so I did. And I was really surprised by the response and the fact that I don't really care for compliments. Because I've had people give me compliments before and then walk out and I never see them again.
Right.
That's not it. Anyway. But when people would be like, cool, can we have you back? For me, that was the compliment. I was like, oh, okay. If you trust me to come back again, all right. Maybe I don't completely suck. And so.
Well, that's the thing though, is when you're performing with somebody or a group, and you break off and you're doing solo, it's all on you.
Yeah.
And shameless plug, I did my history with a friend of mine who interviewed me on episode 75 of the Queen City Music Podcast.
Go check it out.
Yep.
Pause this right now.
And I talked about how I had been performing with my friend John in the Matt and John acoustic duo for years. And then one night he couldn't make a gig and he said, Matt, do you want to just do this solo? I understand if you want to cancel it, we can cancel, but if you want to do it solo, do it solo. I said, okay. And I always describe it as a happy accident because of that kind of started me on my journey that I did to do solo stuff. And it's a different animal when you're doing solo. It's a different animal performing with a band. It's a different animal performing as a trio, a duo, and then solo when it's all on you. Yeah. And you've got to figure it out, not to mention turning into a quote unquote business and finding gigs and stuff, which we'll get into in a little while. So I feel your pain because even though I was singing with the Matt and John acoustic duo, now the burden of just doing all the singing is on me because you're the front man now. Yeah. It's not the group, So how did that feel?
It was tough, and it's honestly why I started getting vocal lessons. I had a huge respect, and I talked to my friend, Fred, Johnny. I was like, "How do you guys sing for 3 hours straight?" Yeah. I was like, "Oh my god!" After those first few shows, I couldn't talk for like 3-4 days, which sucked because once again, I teach Monday through Thursday, so I've got a guitar in my hand. Where I'm usually playing with my students or showing them things. So all day long, and I work like 12-hour days, Monday through Thursday, I've got a guitar or a bass or an ukulele in my hand. And then I'm talking all the time because I'm teaching. And then on the weekend, I've got to go play and sing for 3 hours straight. So it was a lot.
So you feel my pain because I talk all day long as a school teacher.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So that's 8 hours.
Yeah.
And then I would go sing at night on the weekends. And doing the duo was fine because I wasn't singing the whole gig.
Exactly.
Singing solo for 3 hours. Not to mention doing a podcast.
Oh, God, yeah.
And then teaching guitar on the weekends. Like, it was like I won't go into it too much, but I had a vocal hemorrhage at one point. And the vocal therapist told me as I was rehabbing, you are in the top 1%, which made me happy. I was in one aspect of my life in the top 1% of something.
Overachiever.
Yeah. It's not money. It's not finances. But she said, you are the top 1% of people who use their voice. Like, you teach all day long, you sing at night, you teach guitar lessons, you do a podcast. Is there ever a time when you're not talking? Right. And, just musicians, sorry to interrupt, but if you're a singer, it brings new insight into professional singers, like, who do this for a living. And and I don't mean that we don't, but I mean big names who are out touring and doing this. Like, they've got to show up and they've got to give it every night. Yeah. If we're a little off in a local community,
right.
we're
a little bit more grace on that one.
Exactly. But, if you are freaking Axl Rose on a Friday night singing for 10,000 people and you're just getting over a cold and your voice is not what it was and you can't sing You Could Be Mine, in your high register, people are going to notice. Yeah. Nobody's going to notice if you flub or you don't do that song, in your local music set. I can't hit that tonight. I'll go and do something else that's more, suitable for me right now. So, sorry. So singing is very taxing on the voices. Where we're leaving off with you.
Yeah, and especially coming off with saxophone and what I've started doing, because I'll use the looper every now and again, and oftentimes I'll jump into a saxophone solo, then immediately come back into singing. And so screaming on a horn, and then, all right, you got to sing, but now you got to have control. It's like, oh God, breath control and all that kind of stuff. So it's a fun time. It's tough. So yeah, a lot of respect for the people that do it. And
tough to navigate for you doing the vocals and the
horn, back to back. Yeah, just exhausting, because when I play horn, I get into it.
Yeah.
I really get
a lot of
into
breath
it.
support.
A lot of breath support. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's wild. I go hard. but
so how long have you been at it as a soloist?
So solo really started in January. So January 2024.
So that, when did we first meet? Because we met at Gibson Mill Market. That's when I wound up meeting you for the first time. You were,
it was still
quote
cold.
unquote, relieving me. They had the rotation musicians, and I played. I was playing at the brewery, and then I played early, and then you came in after I did.
So that was pretty early on. That was probably like March or February, March. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was pretty fresh.
So right after you started doing the solo stuff.
Fun fact. The manager of Gibson Mill Mall was my high school orchestra director.
Oh, that's hysterical. Did they come in and hear you play?
Well, no. So when I would reach out for gigs, and she messaged back because she was remarried, so I didn't recognize the last name. She was like, "Are you Nicholas Rhodes that graduated in and this and that?" I was like, where's the knife? Like, who is this? And she was like, "It's me, Knight." Facebook stalked her real quick. I was like, oh my gosh.
Wow. Small world.
Yeah. And I was, may or may not have been a little bit of a schmuck in high school. But I'm really glad I didn't ruin that relationship. So once again, for anyone listening, that was
a fun gig, and I'm not sure.
Oh, that was awesome.
They haven't had it again.
No, she reached out to me last minute. She needed like a jazz kind of guy last minute for a Gatsby themed party. But it seemed like they were trying to have more of those. I was kind of talking to them. But I think they do that maybe like once a year.
She said that they were looking at trying to have several times a year, like every quarter or something like that. They were going to do that because it was really cool what they did at Gibson Mill Market. If you haven't been to Gibson Mill Market, audience,
you got to go.
It's a great food hall. Like at the what's the brewery downstairs?
Highlander, I think.
Yes, and what a great place! First off, it's got 2 levels. The antique stores next door. So if you want to do some antique shopping, it's a great place. Just went there. But great food, drinks, and what they did is they had music in different sections at different times. So I played, I think, let's say from 11 to 1, or I only think it was only an hour, wasn't it?
An hour or 2 hours.
Hour and
or
a half, something like that.
Maybe 90 minutes. Yeah.
So I played for like an hour and a half, and then the next half hour, Nicholas came in, and he came in after I did. I don't know if there was anybody after you. But there was somebody downstairs, there was somebody upstairs in one spot, another spot. So when you went there on that day, there was a whole bunch of different musicians all over the Gibson Mill Market. It
was like a little exploratory,
yeah,
almost like a living gallery kind of thing.
Yeah, it was really cool, man. And that's how I wound up meeting you. I think you came in to relieve me, and we were talking. And then, funny enough, you were like, "Yeah, man, I go get my gear." And I'm like, you made like 3 or 4 different trips because you had so much stuff.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, dude, how much stuff are you bringing? You're like, I've got, I got to go get my sax, and I got to get my amps, and I got to. So man, you go all out.
Yeah. So I have to show up to venues 70 minutes before call time. I try to do 90 minutes if it's my first time there. There's just a whole lot of stuff. I'll bring my own rug. I've worked production for years, so I want my cables nice and clean and hidden and tucked away so everything looks aesthetically well. I stole this from Johnny, so I have these little table tents with QR codes that I'll put out on the tables. And that way it leaves me with plenty of time to sound check, and I get to talk with some people in the crowd before I start. Financially, that's great, because then before I even play a note, there's cash in the Venmo. But beyond that, it's really cool because then before you even play a note, they get a feel for like who you are. They get to hear your voice.
Right.
Kind of get a feel, what kind of music do you do? This, that, and the third.
I might have to steal this idea from you. I think it's a great idea.
And most importantly, and this is where it kind of came in with the duo, was I don't like to be rushed.
Right. And
so just as my voice is so warm and soothing, if you can't see the eyebrows, but I don't like to be rushed setting up, because then that leads into the set, at least for me. And so if I'm like panicked, I'm like, I have to hurry up and, oh my gosh, how these cables, and then where's the PA pointed? Can they hear? Is this too loud? Is and then I start, everything's tense, and it's just not anxious, and I don't want to bring that anxiousness and that tenseness into my music. Yeah. And so I want it to be relaxed and fun and enjoyable. So yes, I have to get there significantly earlier than most, but
I try to get, depending on where I'm playing, I've got it down to a science at this point for myself. Like, it doesn't take me more than, with the setup I've got, 20 minutes tops to set up. So I can show, if I'm running late and I get there half hour before, like, I could set up, as long as I have good parking and I don't have to go crazy with parking, I could be set up in 20 minutes or sometimes 10 minutes, and I can be ready to go and still have 10 or 15 minutes before I play to be like, okay, I'm good.
Well, and to your point, especially with the traffic and everything, it's that old quote my dad kind of jolted in, what is it? If you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. If you're late, you're forgotten.
Yeah.
And going into professionalism, that's why I refuse to drink when I play. I've got a lot of stuff going on, so I'm not that cool to multitask like that. But, no other job do you, if I'm working the front desk at, insert bank, and then I've got a, Corona in my hand. Oh, okay, cool. You want to cash deposit? Nowhere is that acceptable. And so I feel like musicians, we already have this against us where it's like, oh, they're getting sloppy. They're drinking. They're tripping over themselves. And so, I might have something at the end, but things like that, showing up on time, that's just a really big thing for me personally, because there's been such a stigma tied to musicians generally of just being behind the 8 ball. And so part of that too, being there 70 minutes early, is most places I can, so I'll leave with an hour. I'll give myself an hour to drive. Usually the drive time only takes me 45 minutes. Yeah. But that extra 15 minutes has saved me so many times, because traffic will happen. Yeah. A wreck will happen. Something will happen. You will have to get gas because you were too lazy to fill up. And for you who are listening to it right now, stop at the gas station now. Fill up on gas. And so just giving that few extra minutes, once again, now you're not rushed. Now you're not speeding. Now you're not getting a traffic ticket. Now, you're welcome.
That's the total opposite of me. I am always rushed. I am always like, let me do this before I leave the house. Let me do that before I leave the house. And then I find myself doing 90, getting to where I've got to be. Oh, no. I mean, the drinking thing on the gig, I don't really mind. I'm fine because I don't have a problem.
No.
You know, I know there's musicians out there and they do have drinking issues and that's just like normal people. Yeah. And that's perfectly fine. I can handle it. And I'm not like pounding beers. I'll have maybe one in the second set, maybe one in the third set, and it's Mick Ultra. The only time I ever have a problem drinking.
That's water. It's all right. You're good.
Yeah. The only time I really have a problem is I've noticed if I get to a gig and I haven't had anything to eat.
That is what I was going to say.
And I have one of those craft beers, which has a higher alcohol content.
They sneak up on you.
And they do. And then all of a sudden, this is so funny. I find myself getting sloppy in my playing. I'm getting forgetful. That's the audience probably doesn't notice, but I notice. No. It brings me to thinking, how the heck did some of these musicians in the 70s function on heroin and alcohol and being completely trashed on stage? Because, like, I'm talking 2 beers and I've got a buzz and I'm getting a little sloppy. How are these guys doing it?
I call this my beer pong phenomenon. So for all the frat bros out there, most people, when they play beer pong, you're drinking, obviously. So a lot of people, when they're sober, are trash. But the more they drink, the better they get. And it's because they've trained themselves.
Wait, hold on. Say that again. I didn't catch that.
So they don't usually play beer pong when they're sober. Because it's at a party, there are drinks involved.
Yes.
So if you start playing and you're sober, they're usually missing shots. It's horrible. But the more they drink, to a limit, of course, the better they get. Because their bodies have been trained, when I'm in this inebriated state, this is how I play. And so I think it might be that, like, training when you're in this inebriated buzz, kind of whatever, you've trained yourself under those specific conditions to do these specific tasks.
Interesting.
That now it almost helps pull it out. So I had a serious brain injury going into the summer of my freshman year in high school. I had like a photographic memory, and so as a schmuck, I had no work ethic because I didn't need one. But it forced me normal. And I became really fascinated with how the brain works. And so there are little things like I try to pass on to my kids. Say there's a test you're studying. Always, you want to sit, that's why, as a teacher, you want to sit in the same seat that you learn the information when you take the test, because the spatial awareness of it all, your brain will retrieve that information based on where you've sat, that environment. Secondly, if you take cinnamon in your coffee, it can be a mint. It can be, some people have used alcohol, where, every time I'm going to study environmental science, I'm going to eat a mint. Mm-hmm. So now your brain has associated a mint to information regarding environmental science. So then what do you do before the test? You pop a mint, and it's going to help memory retrieval of all that information. And so a lot of people, too, we were talking about that with gigs, about, I asked my professor, well, how do you feel about taking a shot for the nerves and to cool, calm, collected? He's like, I mean, but what happens when you don't have a shot? And
well, that's a lot of musicians I've heard. They mention, like, I used to drink going on stage to calm my nerves, and then that becomes an everyday thing, slowly but surely, and they can't function. And
then when you don't have it, it's 20 times worse.
Yeah. Although the funny thing is, I remember reading an article about Stevie Ray Vaughan, and he had talked about how he had become a cocaine addict.
Yeah.
And he said he always functioned playing it. He thought he played better when he was high. And that when he finally quit, he's like, I play so much better when I'm not. I didn't realize like how much better I was.
Yeah.
So that's kind of function. And then I think a lot of musicians in that sense also, if they're touring musicians, they do the alcohol and drugs to fend off the boredom of being in a hotel room. Because it's the same old. You're either on a bus. The best part of the day is going on stage, and you're only doing that for, let's say, 120 minutes, 2 hours, maybe a little bit more if you're a longer, a more established band. And then you're back off stage. Nobody's adoring you. Right. You are now in your hotel room sitting there.
No. And it's totally understandable. Like, I 100% understand. And especially when it's free. It's complimentary.
Oh my God,
hey,
yeah.
dude, like how hard it is to turn things down. You know, I've got to do one drink every 2 weeks. Me personally, it's just any more than that, I'll get sick more than I usually do. My voice will start acting up. So my personal limit I found is, okay, one mixed drink every 2 weeks. You can do that and everything's relatively fine. But it's really hard when the venue comes up. Hey, anything you want to eat, anything you want to drink is free, and you know, craft cocktails and all this kind of stuff. Then you're like, well, it's already included, so I don't want to be wasteful. You know, or you know, people coming up and they're like, hey man, can I get you a drink? And it's like, water. And they're like, no man, like what do you want? And it's like, you know,
and it's harder. You don't even realize it as a singer. Just talking about one thing I've learned is I try not to eat before a gig unless it's a few hours before, because then you're in the middle of a song and you're burping, or even beer. Sometimes I'm drinking in the middle of, you know, and I've had a beer in the set and I'm like, oh God, I got to burp in the middle of the song. You know, I mean, you don't realize it, and you need to much more than just playing guitar or playing sax. I would think as a singer, you need to take much more better care of your voice. And that means staying fully hydrated, maybe not drinking that alcohol. And, you know, I'm just a knucklehead sometimes. I will have that beer and just be like, oh, I'm going to have a beer. I'm going to go back into my old ways and do what I got to do, you know? But it's a totally different situation being a pure instrumentalist rather than being a vocalist.
Absolutely.
You have to keep that in mind.
Yeah. Well, and I've been the same way. So I basically have to fast before, because my stomach will turn in pieces if I eat before a show.
Yeah.
So I can't eat like 2 hours beforehand. Maybe I'll bring a snack or something. But then with the saxophone, anything I eat, if I eat and then go a sax, all those little food grinds are going right through my instrument. Yeah, not a fun time. You know, or my mouth gets too watery that I'm trying to sing and it's all like spit coming out everywhere and it's awkward. So yeah, I totally get that.
Hey, I want to talk to you about one thing, and just we were talking about performing, and you had brought up your spreadsheet earlier.
Oh yeah.
It's a thing with musicians, and a lot of people may not know it. And in a sense, we are very I don't want to say secretive, but we are coveted. Coveted? Would that be a good way to put it? When another musician approaches you, and I've had it happen to myself and other friends that I know, and you don't know them.
That point.
And they hit you up out of the blue, maybe because you play the same spot or something, and they're asking you for information on that spot. What are you getting paid? Who the manager is to contact? And I know we've talked about this off air before, and I've talked to other musicians about it. But I don't mind talking about it on the air. And since you had brought up the spreadsheet earlier about, you know, handing out, it made me think about it. What's your feeling if you get approached about that with other musicians? So, if you don't know them and you haven't,
that's what I was about to say.
Haven't shared information before.
That was probably the main highlight, is if I don't know them. Yeah, so I feel like first off, and we kind of talked about this earlier, was, you know, if I take my kids, if a toy breaks and I always fix it. I've now trained my daughter that when something's broken, hand it off to someone else to fix.
Right.
And so I've eliminated the opportunity for her to learn for herself that, hey, she can actually do things herself. Holy cow, you have that in you to fix something, to see something, analyze it, figure it out, test, fail many times until you figure out how that thing works and you can fix it yourself. So aside from denying her that empowerment of, oh my gosh, like, look, I fixed it.
Right.
You've also now created this habit of, well, I'm just going to go get it from someone else and I'm not going to put the work in. So from that point of view, I do encourage people to put in the work. If you want tips on, hey, how did I find these venues? How did I organize my spreadsheet? All day, I can send you a blank canvas or a blank setup for it. You know, there's some tips. This is how I found them. And then, you know, over time I've organized them and this, that, and the third. Yeah. So for me, a little vulnerable. Once again, I'm going to preface this by saying there's no hard feelings on people that have done this to me before. No hard feelings. I get it. Personally, I just get disappointed. So I feel like we are in such a state that everywhere we go, someone is trying to sell us something. Right. Someone is always trying to achieve their own self-interests every time they introduce themselves to you. I don't want to say every time, the majority of the time. And so what I feel like that does is it leads to this skepticism of, ooh, someone looked at me and smiled at me and gave eye contact. Mm-hmm. Ooh, what do they want? And that's heartbreaking. Like, that is so sad. You know, I remember I was so excited. I was with my wife. We were at South Park Mall, and I'm a sucker for eye contact. You know, growing up, never being tall, but never really feeling seen. I've always just been on like eye contact and a smile.
Problem number one, just you're at South Park Mall, always try to sell you something.
Right, yeah. But yeah, and so we're walking around, and this guy looks at me and like eye contact and smiles. And so I smile back. I'm like, right on. Like, we need more of this. 2 seconds later, hey man, you want to buy my cologne? And I'm like, bro, get out of here. and I kind of get that with musicians, and it's upsetting. I've unfollowed a few, especially from a social media point of view. There is a very delicate ratio I feel like you need to hit. And so, number one, if you don't just check in and say, man, how's life? Or just comment like, dude, that's awesome. And don't ask for anything, but just, hey man, I saw you're playing here. That looks like an awesome spot. I love it. Hope you have a great gig. Yeah. Leave it at that. No one does that. The times I'll get that is someone will start that way, like, oh man, it looks like a cool spot. I'm like, yeah, I'm excited. And they'll be like, follow up. Yeah, man, so I've been trying to get there, like, and then they'll kind of start down that rabbit hole. And once again, it just kind of reaffirms that thought of like, wow, like, oh, you don't care about me. You care. Now, I fight that. I, know these people enough to where I'm like, I know that's not really how you feel.
Sure.
But at the same time, I do want people to understand, like, you've got to keep track of how often. I would say 4 to 1. So 4 out of the 5 engagements you make with people, whether it's other musicians, friends, strangers, whatever, 4 of those 5 need to be selfless, sincere. Hey man, how you doing? Or just, dude, that's an awesome picture. That's so cool. That guitar lick was freaking awesome. I'm totally stealing that from you. 4 to 5. Then one of those 5 times, if you want to ask for a favor, okay. But it's because you've laid that groundwork to show me that I'm not just something to be used.
Yes.
But you actually care enough. And then when you ask a favor, I'm more inclined, not to say I will, but I'm more inclined to help you out because I feel like, okay, you've spent some time actually investing in me as a person. Right. And I feel like the same goes for sales and marketing and all that kind of stuff. If the only time I hear from you is because you're trying to get me to, pre-save this song or buy a t-shirt, I'm like, dude, I don't want to be spammed at. Like, right. I don't. And so if that means I have to take you off so I don't get spammed, like, unfortunately, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have friends in my circle, music friends, who I will swap gigs with. Yeah. And when I say that, I mean it like this. They'll contact me and say, hey, Matt, I've got a gig I can't do. Are you free this night? And I'm like, no, I'm sorry, but thank you for thinking of me. Yeah. Or sometimes it works out where I am free. I don't mind. That's not even a good way to say it. I will then say, now you are in my circle, and I will, if there's something that comes up that I can't do, right. I will say, hey, are you free? I've had it happen. Especially this year, I've been pretty busy, and I've been contacted about stuff, and I will reach out to other friends and say, hey, can you do this gig, or would you like to do this, or are you open? A lot of them are busy, and I eventually find somebody who's open. But that's a way to do it. But what I don't particularly care for, and I've had it a couple of times, and no offense to anybody who does it, maybe they don't know any better. Right. I mean, it sounds awful, but they'll reach out to you out of the blue. You've never met them. You don't talk to them. And they're like, hey, man, I see you're playing this place. I want to get in there. Who do I call? No. And how much are they paying? Or what do you charge? Or how much are you getting paid? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a little too forward if you don't know somebody.
It's very transactional. There are other analogies I would use to describe that when you start off a relationship with money. But anyways, but you get where I'm going, and it's that's the precedent. That's what you're leading with. Yeah. And so I always try to give, to your point, kind of the benefit of, maybe you're not thinking about these things. Yeah. But I feel like these are things to think about.
Yeah.
Because I agree. I just don't think it's classy.
Yeah. Well, it's musicians who are friendly with one another, don't mind talking about that kind of stuff. But you all of a sudden, it's almost like I've worked hard to accumulate these gigs in this list or places that I play, and I've established a relationship with them.
Yep.
You should go do the same thing.
Yeah.
Go over there. Yeah. Go find out. Go talk to somebody. Go press the flesh.
Yeah.
Send an email.
Yeah.
Like, I had to do it. Why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there have been times, and we talked about it before. There's a place they wanted me to play there, but before I could even play there, I had to go meet them in person. So on a day off, I had to go drive 45 minutes to go there to meet them to get the gig. Well, that's great. If I've got to do it, don't be lazy. You go do it too.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the other thing too, and that's where it gets hard and drawing the line, what I call between business and brotherhood is, I have some musician friends who I'm like, friends, y'all are awesome. Professionally, I may or may not want my name associated with you.
Yeah.
And so I've had, and it's like, so when you do that too, and especially if they use your name, now I have to make sure you're on your stuff. Because if you're getting sloppy, you're showing up late, you're drinking, whatever it is, if something happens, my name's on it too. Now from a professional standpoint, that's impacting me. And once again, this is what puts food on the table for my family.
Yeah.
Me and my family. And so I've got to be very conscious and wise with how I do that and who you put your name on.
Yeah.
So I don't blame that one bit.
Yeah. Well, it's just one of those things that there's an etiquette to being a musician in a certain way, and acting in the music community is the same as way as when you go to perform. Yeah. If somebody shows up to a gig, and they get drunk and they're belligerent on a microphone, the venue's not going to have them back.
No.
And if you happen to be the person who recommends them or throws their name out there and they use your name, how's that make you look?
Yep.
And the venue's going to look at you and say, what, you're great. You said your friend was great, but they're not so great.
No.
So there's a lot to think about in that etiquette back and forth in the community, Don't be a jerk.
No. Don't be a schmuck.
That's it. So, God, we've been going a while, but I want to talk about the podcast that you have. You have the Raven on the Road podcast.
I do.
Fill us in about it.
Yes. All right. Speed round. So, this started from See a Need, Fill a Need. If you haven't seen Robots, highly recommend. That is the greatest entrepreneurial degree you will ever get for like $2. It's an old Pixar film or something like that. Fantastic. So it came from the need of my students. Some of them were considering going into the music industry post high school. They're like, hey, I might consider this for college. And I remember being that age too and talking with them. And it's easy to think, okay, I only have two options. A, I'm going to be behind a studio engineer. All right, so sound engineer. Or I'm going to be the guy on stage with an instrument. And so the whole first season evolved around pulling contacts and friends of friends. I wanted to interview people in different roles within the music industry, pick their brains, hear their story. So instead of a checklist of like, do this, that, and this, just listening to like, what happened?
Yeah.
And you see so many common themes, but that just kind of opened up their horizons from that point of view. So that was all season 1. And then season 2 has started with spotlighting musicians. So these are people who I am willing to put my name on as successful musicians in the area that are doing the thing and doing it well.
Yeah.
And sitting them down and just talking, like, what's your story, and what's worked. And sometimes it'll go into kind of a philosophical approach of their why. Other times it's been pretty business oriented, like, hey, these are techniques and strategies I've used to grow in these areas, and I've seen it profitable from marketing and financially.
Yeah.
So it's been really cool to have such a diverse spread of information at the fingertips. Something I'm trying to get better at now, I need to plan more, I've been putting this off too long, is musician cocktail parties. Once again, anyone steal this, there's a book by Nick Gregg called The 90-Minute Cocktail Party, I think. Monday I had it, or two hour cocktail party is what it's called. And so I had one back in August. from 6 to 8 o'clock on, I think, a Tuesday. But you do a Monday or Tuesday night. No one's got anything going on from 6 to 8 on a Monday or Tuesday. So it's perfect. Because musicians, we have the same schedule.
Yes.
And so I reached out to these people who I put on a huge pedestal. I was like, you guys are awesome. I want to be like you guys. And the overwhelming yeses I was getting, because there, once again, just like the students, there was such a hunger for community among the musicians that wasn't with an instrument in the hand. That was just a genuine, here in the room kind of basis. And so we had it set in August. That was the one day we had that tornado come through, literally ripped the tree out of my backyard. And so a lot of people didn't come. Totally understand. But a handful of people did come. And I decided, because everyone's like, are you going to reschedule? I was like, I don't reschedule. So I was like, if I said I'm going to do something, I take my word seriously. If I say I'm going to do something, dude, I'm doing it. So I'm like, if no one shows up, no one shows up. That's my fault. Handful of people showed up. And I was like, dude, anyone who's crazy enough to do this is my kind of crazy. And we had some great cats coming in, and I still keep up with a lot of them. And to your point, some of them, Nate Davis, Johnny Rocket, of sharing gigs. Mm-hmm. Hey, I've got this going on. One of them, Annie Hayden, we actually do some duo stuff every now and again. And it's great because she actually plays guitar and sings.
Wasn't she at the Gibson?
She was upstairs. I got her that gig.
I mentioned her.
I got her.
I met her, and I was like, you sounded good. But I had to go. Yeah,
so once again, for that, when at Gibson Mill, when they were looking for more artists, like I threw her name out because I was like, hey, she's great. I was able to get her that, and so
that's fantastic. Cool. I think they also have. There's I don't want to say once a quarter, but they did one at the neighborhood theater. It was a local music get together.
Okay,
but I think they have it's a different dynamic in a sense because they have speakers and people talking and giving information about stuff. I actually have, and I think I might have sent you a thing to join the guitar teachers music community for Charlotte.
Oh, okay.
Did I send that to you?
Maybe not. Was that Facebook?
Yeah.
I'll double check.
Yeah. I might not have been able to send it because you might not be officially a friend you're like music friend, and it's I don't know. I have to check. I'll show it to you afterwards.
Okay. Yeah.
But anyway, there's lots of little communities in Charlotte, but it's everything. I think there would be a better sense of community if more people were doing what you do. Yeah. Getting people together.
And like I said, it's been really cool. And even a quick little tangent. There's I was playing at Valentine Village Markets.
Yeah.
And I'd finished my set. I didn't realize there was another musician coming afterwards. So I realized someone was there and saw the guitar case. I was like, oh no. So I've got a lot of stuff. So I'm hurry up trying to flip everything over. And as she's setting up, I'm like, she had a hat so I couldn't really see her face. And I was like, don't want to be weird. But I'm looking, I'm like, I've seen that rug before. And I was like, is this who I think it is? And so I'm like, how do I not be awkward, which for me is the story of my life. Anyway, and so I'm like, hey, how are you? She's like, oh, good. I was like, all right, awesome, yeah. And we're chatting for a little bit. I was like, I'm sorry. Your name's not Savannah, is it? And she's like, do I know you?
Savannah Harmon?
Savannah Harmon.
Yes, and I was name like, I've never met.
Yeah. And so I was like, oh, good to finally put a face with the name, and, super sweet, easy to get on with. Really, really nice. And I was telling her, I was like, I'm trying to do better of like hanging out with people. And she's like, yeah, there's this guy who was actually doing this like cocktail party thing at his house. Well, I thought it was an awesome idea and I wanted to go, but a hurricane kind of thing came through. And I was like, yeah, my name is Nicholas Rhodes. It's good to meet you. She was like, wait. And, light bulb clicked and it was hilarious.
That's great.
But yeah, and, cause we don't get to do that often. And, open mics are awesome, but I just, it's like, you're more than a musician.
Yes.
That is part of what we do, but that's not entirely who we are. And so that's why I just liked, coming to the house. It's 2 hours. So like, it's not
a big commitment.
No, it's a hard cutoff. We'll have snacks. You can come in, a little bit late, whatever, but like it's short, it's sweet. There are a few, little conversation goings, but it's meant to be just this lighthearted, hey, let's hang out and get to know you a little bit and then get out, go home.
Yeah.
And so I'm not holding a gun to your head for you to stay for 5 hours while I cook dinner. It's super relaxed, super easy. Monday, Tuesday night. You're just going to go about your week. So
that's a nice thing, man. Are you doing it again at any point?
I need to. Like I said, I've been putting it off, and you can do it for like under $100 too. So
there you go.
We'll see. I'll probably be doing it when the fall kicks in. So I'll make sure to give y'all notice.
Yeah, man. Let me know. I'd love to come.
So, yeah.
It's a Tuesday night.
Have you ever? There you go.
I'll try.
So,
I'll
that's the thing too. I try to find days that, like, who gets gigs on Mondays or Tuesdays. So, like, once again, trying to get in good. So I'll usually offer a few dates and then kind of see.
Free food and drinks. You can come over.
There you go.
Oh, man. Nicholas, it was great talking to you, man.
Yeah, same.
So as we wrap things up, how do we get in touch with Nicholas Rhodes? If we're interested in guitar lessons, we're interested in hiring you for booking, for music, and how do we get in touch with you and find out about your podcast?
Oh, yeah. So Instagram, Facebook, and website. All of it's under theravenandtheroad.com, if it's a website. For the podcast, it is up on all major streaming platforms. So it's under the music industry, The Raven and the Road. So if you punch that in, it'll pull it on up for you.
Awesome. Well, Nicholas, thank you, man. Much success to you in the future.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you for coming in, man. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye. Thanks for listening to episode 78 of the Queen City Music Podcast, and I hope you'll go back and check out our past episodes. And if you can be so kind as to leave a review, I'd greatly appreciate it. You can find the QCMP on all your favorite streaming platforms. As always, if you have an idea for an episode or would like to be a guest on the QCMP, reach out to me at qcmusicpodcast@gmail.com. Also, check out our local partners, Records on the Wall at rexonthewall.com, Reporting from 20XX at reportingfrom20xx.wordpress.com, Queen City Live at instagram.com/Queen City Live Music, and our friends over at Charlotte New Music at charlottenewmusic.org. Until next month, get out there and support your local music scene by hearing some of these fantastic local artists, as well as supporting some of these music businesses. Take care.